Yes.
Okay.
Great. All right. Well, of course, before we start, let's take a moment to generate the appropriate motivation, the right kind of motivation, to think that we now have here the opportunity to study this precious text. And may this become a cause for us to realize the meaning of Changkya Rölpai Dorjé's words, to realize the ultimate nature of all phenomena. And then, based on that, to attain the fully enlightened state of a Buddha. Not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of all sentient beings. Try to really feel that from the depth of your heart. And then, without letting go of your motivation, let's recite the prayers. Okay.
Refuge and Bodhichitta. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I didn't spend much time with the motivation, well, simply because we have only little time and we've only just started the text. And so I'll go into it without giving a lot of the explanation I gave last time. It starts off, as you know, with the worship, the verse of worship that is 3 lines only, and then it's followed by 1 line of the promise to compose the text. As you've heard last time, it's directed at the author's own teacher. So one of his teachers was Togengawan Gyatso, and then of course also the 7th Dalai Lama, Kelsang Gyatso, and he had plenty of other teachers, but those were probably his 2 main teachers that he addressed here. And he's saying that, well, these teachers revealed bare, that is taught clearly the wonder. What is the wonder? The lack of inherent existence, which is so profound since it's difficult to realize. So that they taught this, well, the wonder of dependent arising, of course, in the sense of, although phenomena appear, so they're dependently arisen, they appear, still they lack inherent existence. And although they lack inherent existence, nonetheless they appear. So that is the wonder that is taught, that was taught by the author's teachers. And so he asked them, kindly reside in my heart. It's like, remain with me, guide me, continue to be with me. And that is followed by, I have to just look at it myself. Oh, it's followed by a line of promising to compose the text. I mean, knowing myself, how many projects I start and don't complete, starting to write something, translate something, and unless there's a deadline, I don't complete it. So it makes perfect sense to start with a promise to compose the text and complete the text. And so it's these words, as I utter these spontaneous words that come spontaneously from his heart, from thoughts flickering through my mind. Actually, literally in Tibetan, it says from 3 words. So literally it's 3 words. When I translate it into German, I was thinking, should I say 3 words? But it's different from saying 1,000 rays, I mean, the 1,000 rays of the sun, which of course is not literal. It doesn't mean literally that there are 1,000, but the sun only has 1,000 rays. Or for instance, a title that you're all familiar with is the 100 deities of Bodhichitta. That's not literally 100. It just means a lot. So the 1,000 rays sun, or the 100 deities of Bodhichitta, an 8-petal lotus. So these are all kind of numbers given that they're not literally, 1,000, 100, or 8, and so forth. So here also, when it says I utter these words, it's not 3, but it's just a short text. So Geshe didn't translate it that way. I also chose not to do it. So I utter these words spontaneously, that's in the Tibetan, from thoughts flickering through my mind. So it was not in any way forced or controlled. It just kind of arose very spontaneously. We had that last time, but I just thought to go through it quickly once again. And then the actual text starts with a verse and a half as an introduction to the main material. So it tells us about a lunatic child, that is the mind of the author. Lunatic in the sense of being, of course, afflicted by the misapprehension of reality. And that is true for ourselves. I mean, our whole life, of course, is affected by this, root ignorance that we all have. And in that way, our mind is lunatic as well. And then the mind of the author here saying that he's seeking emptiness. There are actually some explanations that the author has either just realized emptiness conceptually, and some say has realized emptiness, has just realized emptiness directly. So different explanations given, whichever it is, hard to say. But the point is that here we're told that, this mind, the mind of the author, seeking emptiness, is seeking the ultimate nature of all phenomena. And the ultimate nature of phenomena of the mind of the person seeking, or emptiness in general, that is described as the mother. Old in the sense has always been around. Emptiness has always existed. So old in that sense. And mother, as just briefly talked about it last time, of course, we associate the wisdom realizing emptiness with the mother that gives rise to all the Buddhas. But also in the sense that the mother is someone we really need, someone very important in our life. So here, emptiness, not referring to wisdom as such, but to the object emptiness itself. We need it. One reason is nothing could exist if things didn't lack inherent existence. It would be impossible. Nothing could possibly exist. So the only way in which phenomena can exist is through the lack of inherent existence. And we just falsely project a mode of existence that has never been there. But another reason why emptiness is like a mother to us, very important mother. So in the same way as our real life mother is responsible for our well-being, so emptiness is responsible for our well-being, because if we realize emptiness, then that becomes the antidote. That mind realizing emptiness becomes the antidote to all our misapprehensions. As we know, it's the root of everything. And so if we realize that phenomena don't exist the way they appear, we can reduce our anger, our aversion, all our afflictive emotions, reduce them initially, and then totally overcome them. So it's like a mother to us. This is what the first verse that I read last time tells us. So the author says he lost his mother, which really means he's never found her. It's not been, since beginningless time, has not been aware that phenomena don't exist the way they appear to us, in the way in which they appear to us. And the thing is, the author has already realized it, but kind of says he's about to realize it. It's just a way of, I guess, expressing humility. So he's saying by chance, spontaneously, or well, as in like having created all the causes and conditions, I'm about to recognize that she's been with me all along. So emptiness has been with me, with us. I mean, to think of ourselves, this is, of course, the author speaking, but for us, emptiness has always been there. Things have never existed the way they appear to us. Our self has never existed the way it appears to us. And we need to, well, really allow for this to sink deeper, to study it, of course, but also remind ourselves over and over again. This is why I really enjoyed the dedication prayer at the end last time by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's so skillful in this way of bringing mindfulness into our practice, saying, I who don't exist inherently, I dedicate this merit which doesn't exist inherently. I mean, really, if we want to practice emptiness, we want to bring it into our life. I mean, His Holiness has done such an amazing job this morning to convey this practice to us, this practice of combining emptiness and bodhicitta, visualizing bodhicitta in the form of a white moon, and the mind of the emptiness, or the mind of emptiness, as a standing vajra, and kind of in combination of these two, unifying those two. And of course, His Holiness has spoken about, first thing we should do in the morning is think of bodhicitta. We wake up. I mean, His Holiness says that's what I do. Why does he say? Why does he tell us? In order for us to do the same thing. And the Taiwanese, the students this morning, are very dedicated to His Holiness. So His Holiness can definitely be more assertive in like saying, well, if you are my students, you have to do this. If you're my disciples, you need to do this. You need to follow me. He talked about this in a very strong way. It was very moving, I felt. And so His Holiness saying, if you're my disciples, do this. So I get up early in the morning. First thing I do is I generate bodhicitta. But then also to possibly, if we can, to think, I who don't exist inherently, will go and have a shower, which doesn't exist inherently. And then I have a cup of coffee, which doesn't exist inherently. To remind ourselves again and again, and then trouble arises. Well, there's this trouble, which doesn't exist inherently. I mean, it's just the power of the mind. Psychologists tell us if we're really stressed out and we just smile, it reduces the level of our stress. I mean, just a fake smile. Just force yourself to smile and it reduces our stress. Well, if that's true, just to tell yourself over and over, well, that's the car I'm going to drive to work to. Neither the car exists inherently nor the traffic jam, and so forth. And then if we've got some time to reflect upon why that is the case. All right. Anyway, we'll come to this, but we've still got quite a few verses to go. And I'll continue first to go through these verses. Anyway, now, as we've had in this first verse, or first verse, I should say, verse number 2, really, first verse of the explanation, then the text goes on to say, and now what does it explain? How to realize exactly that the mother has been with us. Emptiness has been with us. The lack of inherent existence has been with us all the time. Everything lacks inherent existence. So last time, from some of your questions, some ask, are the teachings, do they lack inherent existence? Some ask about the teacher and so forth. So we need to remind ourselves. And that is also the tricky part. That's why in the Heart Sutra, it says no eye, no ear, no nose, and so forth. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has told us this joke quite a few times. You may have heard His Holiness talk about this. He says, like, someone heard the Heart Sutra being recited by another person and then asked this person, well, why do you say no eye, no ear, no nose? Why not just say no face, right? But of course, there's a need for saying so. We need to be reminded of each part. Each atom, none of the atoms that make up our face exist inherently, not our nose, not our. So to really go through it, because our mind is so habituated to grasping onto something really there, something truly there, which is exactly why we we need to remind ourselves over and over again to just counteract this mind. Of course, that's not enough, but starting off in that way until we find the time, we make the time to meditate more intensely on emptiness, that's definitely a good way to stay in the game, if you like, to reduce or at least not strengthen these imprints we continuously leave on our mind, continuously left by self-grasping, by the wrong, by the misapprehension of reality. Okay, then it tells us, how do we realize emptiness? Through our brother, dependent arising. Now, brother is not saying father, saying brother. Now, brother can of course mean our sibling brother, but in Asia, so for instance in Tibet, brother can also mean an older person, an older man. So for elder woman, for a woman who's older than us, you say acha, like older sister. And for a man who's older than you, you call him brother. It's like meaning, here the word brother is actually older brother. So someone who can teach you something. Therefore, when you, in the West, we often believe when we're in Dharamsala, when we see a woman, we, like madam, would say madam in English. Well, not everyone likes it, but okay, call them madam. In Tibetan, some people use the word acha, but acha means older sister. So if you meet someone who's maybe 10 years younger than you, and it's obvious that she's younger, and you call this person acha, they're quite offended. It's a common mistake people make when they learn Tibetan. Not that it's important, but I just remembered. Anyway, so if someone is older than you, you call them older sister or older brother. So an older brother is someone you can learn something from, but doesn't hold the same position as your father. Now, what does that mean? Here, dependent arising is not dependent arising in general, because dependent arising in general refers to the subtlest level of dependent arising. The subtlest level, which you can only understand once you've understood emptiness. Only once you realize emptiness can you realize the subtlest level of dependent arising. So Andrew asked this really good question last time. I've actually asked some students in another class I'm teaching to answer this question. It was such a good question about why dependent arising is not the ultimate nature. It's actually more difficult to realize the whole package that is dependent arising on its subtlest level. That is more difficult to realize than emptiness, because its realization needs to be preceded by the realization of emptiness, because you need to understand that phenomena are merely labeled, as in like labeled without having any inherent existence. So therefore, first you need to understand that they have no inherent existence, and then understand that nonetheless they exist, but as being labeled without having any further existence other than being labeled, with having no inherent existence. And so from that, it becomes clear that this is harder to understand than emptiness itself. And you need to have the understanding of emptiness first, and still is not the ultimate nature. Why is it not the ultimate nature? I've said it last time, but just to repeat it here again, it's not the ultimate nature because we don't automatically hold, we don't innately hold on to phenomena to exist independently. We don't. We do have a sense, oh, there's this I, there's this inherent I, but we see it as connected to mind and body, because otherwise we would never say I have a headache when my head hurts. If I thought my I existed independently, innately, if I had this innate sense it exists independently of mind and body, it'd be like my eyes over here and my body's over there. So this connection, my mind wouldn't make that connection. So my mind thrives on contradictions, and we all know that. In that we believe, in that we don't have this innate, in that we believe there's something more than just a labeled I. There's more to it. That I doesn't exist independently of mind and body. So it's connected to them and still is separate from them. There's something there. For lack of a better way of saying it, there's something there. It feels that way, it appears that way, and I've acted on that since beginning this time. And therefore, dependent arising is not an ultimate nature, because we don't believe, we don't hold on to, it's not the root misapprehension that is responsible for all our afflictions, this view that phenomena exist independently. So how does it come into like, why do we always talk about existing independently in the context of inherent existence? Because it would absurdly follow, if phenomena existed inherently, they would exist independently. That is, in other words, if the I existed inherently, either would be one with the aggregates, and so dependence is not given, or it would be totally separate. So that's, and since it's not one, the other option would be it existed totally independently. But as I said, dependent arising is for that reason not the ultimate nature, because the opposite of dependent arising is not the object of the root ignorance. All right, just to stress that again, very important question. And so far, none of the other people from the class have sent me emails, but none of them has answered it correctly. So I need to go more into this. And it was great you asked this question, Andrew. Okay, anyway, brother here is a coarser level of dependent arising. It is a coarser level of dependent arising because, and this is important, so if you study philosophy, you need to know this. Something like emptiness. Emptiness is a slightly hidden phenomenon. It's not obvious. Obvious phenomena, you don't need reasoning. You can just understand them by looking at them, maybe someone explaining them, you understand them. No, slightly hidden phenomena, you need a correct reason. You need a sign, as they call it, something that indicates that A is B. Okay, so B here is lack of inherent existence. How do I come to understand that A, let's say A is myself, doesn't exist inherently. So A, myself, is B, that is, it lacks inherent existence. I need something that points me in that direction, that is easier understood than emptiness itself. So it's the coarser level of dependent arising. Based on that phenomena depend on causes and conditions, on parts, and even on labeling, even just on labeling, without saying it's merely labeled. That takes you right away into the deepest level, but that phenomena are labeled, that phenomena depend on parts. So these are the coarser levels, and based on those, I can come to understand, therefore, they don't exist inherently. Now you may say, I've already understood dependent arising. I believe in dependent arising. But if you were there this morning, His Holiness said something this morning that I find quite significant. His Holiness said that non-Buddhist philosophers do not assert dependent arising. Now, automatically you may think, well, but they do believe in dependence. They do believe if you saw a seed, then a sprout will arise, that the sprout is dependent on the seed and so forth. But what does it mean to believe in dependent arising, to be convinced of dependent arising? It requires consistency, that no matter what, that if, for instance, I believe, okay, a sprout depends on the seed, but my suffering depends on God, well, that from a Buddhist point of view is not consistent. You do believe a certain type of dependent arising, but this is not a cause. Another sentient being cannot, another living being, even if it's God, cannot give me suffering. So for suffering to arise, certain causes, internal causes, they need to give rise to suffering. And therefore also dependence on parts, dependence on labeling, all that needs to be accepted, or at least dependence on parts and dependence on labeling. All right, you can get away with that because in the lower philosophical schools are held to assert dependent arising because dependence on causes and conditions, they're very consistent with that. But non-Buddhist philosophers, because of their inconsistency when it comes to certain causes, they believe there's a permanent I and there's a permanent creator God. So from that point of view, their understanding of dependent arising from the point of view of causes and conditions is not complete. That's why it's not considered that non-Buddhist philosophers assert dependent arising. And in the same way, our dependent arising is also not consistent. In some way, we believe other people are responsible for all our trouble. So in terms of causes and conditions, there's no sense I'm also responsible, and so forth. Now, we don't have to understand that on all its deeper levels, but still more of a sense of consistency, a better understanding of dependent arising. That then indicates, so once we understand the self exists in dependence on causes and conditions, and these causes and conditions are many, external and internal ones. Doesn't mean you have to understand those subtlest level of karma, but still have some understanding. And then based on this understanding of the I being dependently arisen, then you can come to understand for the first time that the I doesn't exist inherently. And that mind is an inferential cognizer. It's called an inferential cognizer because you infer based on the fact that the I doesn't exist in dependence on other phenomena. In dependence on that, you infer that it doesn't exist inherently. And that is a conceptual mind, and it's through a generic image of emptiness. You don't directly realize emptiness as you would with the sense consciousness, but through what's called a generic image, the appearance of what emptiness means to you. Through that, you realize emptiness for the first time, which is why it says here, quietly spoken by my brother, dependent arising. Quietly here means independence on that generic image. You come to understand dependent arising. And whereas previously it was like, it is like this, it is like that. In Tibetan, it says, it is, really. It is. So everything is inherently, everything exists the way it appears. Now, for the first time, you kind of tentatively approach this idea, well, it's not that way. It doesn't exist the way it appears. All right. So that's what it says in verse 3, at least the first 2 lines. And then the text continues. I've already mentioned all this, so I did it again, but never mind. So then the actual meaning is set forth here. There was the word perhaps, quietly. And again, it's this tentative understanding, and quietly means with the conceptual mind, independence on an inferential cognizer, which in turn has arisen, this mind called an inferential cognizer, that has arisen in dependence on this reasoning of dependent arising, the brother. Then comes the extensive explanation. First of all, we need to recognize that all phenomena are manifestations of emptiness. So what does it say in verse 3? This diverse subject-object world. What is this subject-object world? Well, perceiving minds, apprehending minds, and then that which is apprehended. This is really our universe, our own mind. My reality is what appears to my mind and my mind itself. So when I say my mind, my reality, well, it's what appears to my mind. And so thus my reality includes my different types of consciousness and the objects that appear to those minds and the objects that I apprehend. What other reality is there? That is my reality, okay? And then there's your reality. And basically there's the summary of all realities. That's reality, right? Okay, so therefore this diverse subject-object world, perceiving minds and their objects, this world is my mother's gentle smile. It's my mother's gentle, it's an expression of emptiness, an expression of emptiness. That's such a weird way of putting it. It's like saying in the Heart Sutra, form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is only possible, form is only possible because it's empty. So in other words, form is almost like a manifestation of emptiness. If phenomena didn't lack inherent existence, you wouldn't have form. If phenomena didn't lack inherent existence, you wouldn't have consciousness, you wouldn't have objects, you wouldn't have anything. I mean, we do talk about it hypothetically, but even that is just hypothetically. I mean, nothing would be possible. Therefore, everything is like my mother's gentle smile. It's an expression. So just as my smile is an expression of my mood and so forth, well, likewise, here we talk about this diverse, the many different phenomena. There are manifestations of emptiness. Everything is in the nature of the lack of inherent existence. And this is also true for the cycle of birth and death, right? It's because of our misapprehension, because we don't understand this fact that we're born and die in samsara. We are born, we are dying, all this cycle of birth, because we don't realize exactly that everything is an expression of emptiness. And so her deceptive words, the mother's deceptive words here is really saying our existence, that is the result of karma and afflictions, do not exist in the way in which they actually exist, in which they appear. So these phenomena, our existence is the result of karma and afflictions, in that they exist in a different way in which they appear. So we are deceived by the fact that phenomena don't exist in the way in which it appears. So it's kind of her deceptive words. Of course, it's not that she's deceiving us, but that we are deceived ourselves. It's kind of like saying, sometimes we say like the environment around us is the truth of suffering. But really a truth of suffering, it's like they are creating the suffering for us, but actually it's us creating suffering. And so therefore the environment we perceive is therefore also a truth of suffering. So it's not blaming a car and a table saying they give us the suffering. No, it's actually coming from our own mind. But as we've already heard, reality, my reality comes from my own mind. It's not surprising that we talk like that. This object over there is a truth of suffering. Well, it's really that which appears to my mind. And in the same way here, emptiness, of course, emptiness doesn't deceive us, but we are deceived by it. We don't realize the actual nature of phenomena. We don't realize the mother, and therefore we talk of deceptive words. So then it goes on to say in verse 4, my undeceiving mother. Actually, she's not. So it's kind of like, she's deceptive, but she's not. Well, to my mind, she's deceptive in that I'm deceived because of my misapprehension of reality, which of course is also an expression of my mother. Everything is an expression of emptiness. Everything is possible because of emptiness. And so that being the case, nonetheless, I'm deceived, but actually my mother is undeceiving. Why? Because, I say the ear of a dog. Oh, more than that. How cute. Okay, anyway, so therefore, my undeceiving mother means in actuality, what's a cat? In actuality, my mother is undeceiving in that when emptiness really appears directly to the mind, then that is emptiness itself, appears exactly in the way in which it exists. So there's no deceptive appearance. When we take emptiness, when emptiness becomes the object of a direct mind, in that way we say emptiness is non-deceiving. But as long as we don't have that direct appearance of emptiness, that direct perception of emptiness, we are deceived. So saying, my undeceiving mother, you've betrayed me. Well, I've betrayed myself, really. So it's not literally saying that emptiness but I'm betrayed by emptiness in the sense that I don't yet understand it. I'm not aware of it. So actually with verse, yes, so she has betrayed me. So what does it mean is that I was led astray by karma and afflictions and now hope to be, you have betrayed me. Yeah, sorry, I've already explained that before. My undeceiving mother, you've betrayed me in that, as I said, I've been betrayed really by my misapprehension of reality, which of course is only possible because of the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena. And I hope to be saved by my brother, dependent arising. So to say once again, right now, we're not aware of emptiness, but it is through dependent arising, a coarser level of dependent arising, which serves as a correct reason that I have hopes, that I have the hope to be saved, that I have the hope to come to realize how phenomena really exist. Now, that part described that was the part of recognizing that all phenomena are manifestation of emptiness. And then the next part, I'm just following some of the outlines from Geshe Wangmo, who's the author of the commentary on this text, which was translated into English. Now, the next part is that the release of cyclic existence depends on emptiness. Okay, we've already briefly mentioned it. We briefly addressed this idea that our afflictive emotions, all our misapprehensions other than our root misapprehension comes from this root ignorance. But here, the purpose is actually clearly explained again, that it's in order to remove ourselves, to free ourselves from the situation we're in right now. That everything we do is in the nature of suffering. Now, there's so many ways to talk about suffering, but I just want to say this much. Our way of existence to understand, how we are suffering one way, of course, is the suffering of suffering. We don't need to have any explanation on that. And the suffering of change, even without going into that whatever we do, eventually it changes into suffering. But just think that whatever we do, it requires effort. That we can never just lay back and just be happy and relaxed, because sooner or later, some suffering is going to arise. So we get hungry, and again, we have to make an effort and make food. Or if we just sit in the same place, we start feeling achy. We have to take a shower. We can never be just in the same place, in the same position for very long. That shows us that our natures and our existence is in the nature of suffering. Because if we could just be still and go on forever, well, that would mean our existence is not in the nature of suffering. But everything we do requires effort. I mean, to just have a basic sense of well-being, we have to make an effort. So if you think about this in your day-to-day life, it's like again and again, you have to get up and do this or do that. I mean, then you're tired, then you're sleepy, then you don't want to lie in bed any longer. And all these wishes and all these needs that we have one after the other. And if we don't fulfill these needs, we'll suffer. So just thinking about that everything requires so much effort. There's nothing effortless. I mean, little things require a certain amount of effort, but the more important things require even greater effort. Okay, so that definitely shows us we are in a situation right now where there's true peace of mind. Lasting peace of mind is not possible. But how is it possible? Well, through understanding emptiness. And that is described here with verse 4, the last two lines of verse 4, when it says, "It is ultimately in your kindness alone, O Mother, that my hopes for freedom lie." So it's your kindness, emptiness. Only through realizing emptiness can I be liberated. Everything else, and so here it says ultimately, because everything else leads only to temporary relief from suffering. So everything else I try, temporary, completely temporary. Whatever I do, other than realizing emptiness, is not a solution. So whether we like it or not, in the end, it comes down to realizing emptiness. And then it goes on to say, but if the duality of subjects and objects, so duality of subjects and objects, what does that mean? Well, the sense that here duality can mean different things, but there are actually three kinds of duality that are usually described. In other words, three reasons for saying that there's a duality between subject and object. The first is that there are consciousnesses, or yes, to consciousness, to an ordinary consciousness in general, inherent existence always appears. In fact, only the mind that realizes emptiness directly. That's why we see emptiness, or our mother, is undeceiving, or doesn't deceive, or is true, if you like. True in the sense that the only mind that is not deceived, that doesn't have the appearance of inherent existence, is the mind that realizes emptiness directly. All the other minds, every other mind we have, always has the appearance of inherent existence. That's why it's so difficult to realize emptiness, because everything seems to be the opposite way in which it actually exists. Every mind is has this mistaken appearance, which is one reason why we say there's a duality of subject and object. The second reason why we say for an ordinary person there's a duality of subject and object is because there's always the appearance of a conventional truth. Always. The only mind that doesn't have the appearance of a conventional truth is the mind that realizes emptiness directly. That's another reason for saying our mind, other than the mind realizing emptiness directly, our minds, they're all dual minds. They have this, this aspect of duality. First of all, because inherent existence appears, and secondly, because always a conventional truth appears. And conventional truths just happen to appear always as if existing inherently. So you have actually a reason for those two. And then lastly, why is there this aspect of duality when it comes to the mind? Because to the mind, it seems that the mind is over here and the object is over there. There's a kind of distance. There's a sense that the object is distant from the mind. Whereas when you realize emptiness directly, there's a sense the mind is like water and emptiness is like water. And the perception of emptiness is like water being poured into water. Okay. So therefore, there's this threefold duality as just mentioned. Okay. Now, having said this, if the duality of the subject and object is as it seems to be, if that duality was not mistaken, but phenomena really existed in that way, in that phenomena, the way they appear is inherently, they exist. Conventional truth, when they appear, well, their mode of appearance is in accordance with reality. And thirdly, that the sense of distance, that's also in accordance with reality. Well, nothing could be done. We'd be stuck in samsara. I mean, it's again, hypothetically, if that really was possible, nothing could be done. Not even the Buddhas of the 3 times, past, present, and future, could in any way help us. All right. So that's what it says in verse 5, the first 2 lines. Sorry, I'm racing through it a little bit, but I want to at least finish the whole text. And there's still some explanation that's quite important. Now, to continue, then, what is the reason for liberation? What is the reason for that? Why is it? So initially we heard that in order to release, in order to be liberated, we need emptiness, we need the mother. And now the reason is given with verse 5, but the last 2 lines, so line 3 and 4. Here it says, but this ever-shifting spectacle is in truth my changeless mother's expressions. But in actuality, things don't exist that way. So going back to the way phenomena exist, well, it's just an expression of my mother, of emptiness. So this ever-shifting spectacle, it's great to describe my life as this spectacle, as this useless, senseless spectacle. With this main actor, my self-cherishing mind. It's a great comedy. Really, if I watch my own mind, it makes me laugh. So it's this spectacle, it's this huge comedy. And so this ever-shifting spectacle of mind and its object, which is always changing, is in truth the expression of the unchanging emptiness. Okay. Therefore, there's indeed a way out. Okay. So having said that, and again, as before, we heard the reasons phenomena lack inherent existence, and it's through understanding emptiness, which is permanent. Everything else around us is impermanent, but emptiness being permanent, once we realize that, we can actually find this way. We can find a way out. We can liberate ourselves. And then in verse 6 only has 3 lines. Now it goes even further, because when we say emptiness, emptiness can only be really understood in combination with dependent arising. This time, the subtlest level. The subtlest level. So therefore, what's described now, it's even going further, it's going deeper, recognizing all phenomena as manifestations of appearance, that is referring to dependent arising, and emptiness. All phenomena are manifestations of appearance and emptiness. All right, so bringing those 2 together. Number 6 says, this inexpressible mother, inexpressible, mother is inexpressible. You've had that expression before, meaning that when we talk about emptiness, of course we can talk about emptiness, but these words are just leading us in the right direction. in actuality, once we realize emptiness, in particular directly, when we realize emptiness directly, then, well, nothing can describe that perception, that apprehension, that realization. It's beyond words, and it's beyond our conceptual understanding of emptiness. Remember, previously I talked about when you realize emptiness for the first time, that's not a direct realization. That is called a conceptual realization. When you realize emptiness conceptually, it's a type of mind that uses something that is similar to a word, except it's sometimes described, well, a word, an actual word and a meaning generality are very similar. One is a verbal aspect, and one is a mental aspect. So when I use a word, it's just a generalization. It's a general, like when I say table, it's just a general table that it's a word for a generality that in actuality doesn't exist the way it's expressed. I mean, every table is unique. So when I say table, it seems to convey there is this kind of general tableness there, some general kind of table. But that is, well, due to our sense of inherent existence, of course, that's the main reason, but also because the word falls short of describing what table really is, right? A word, if I say here the word, first of all, if you don't know what a table is, it doesn't really mean you understand it. So just the word itself. But even though you do understand what a table is, just saying table doesn't refer to all the individual aspects of each and every table. So it's a very general way to refer to an object called table. When you use a conceptual mind, it's similar in that you have a generic image. You have something like a word appearing. It's not a word in itself, because that's a sound, but it's a generic image. It's just a kind of general representation of what a table means to you. Okay, so when you think now of table without having a table in front of you, so if you have a table in front of you, your eye consciousness perceives the table, this unique table. But when you think of table, just a general representation of what table is appears to your mind. That is called generic image. If you think of your mother right now, and she's not right next to you, I mean, she's just thinking of her, then it's like an image of her appears as if frozen in time, like a certain moment that is typical for you seeing your mother, whatever. So that is this generic image. And when we realize emptiness, it's the same. There's a representation of emptiness. There's just, what does emptiness mean to you? That appears to the mind. And through this, you can realize emptiness conceptually. That is not what we're aiming for. That is only a means to an end. To which end? Well, definitely to realizing emptiness directly. And once you do this, this emptiness is inexpressible. This inexpressible mother of mind, therefore, so this is what the author is talking of, this inexpressible mother, the emptiness of my own mind and emptiness in general, not existing inherently in any form, so not existing in any external form, it's inexpressible, lack of inherent existence. At least our mind right now does not really apprehend what emptiness refers to. So inexpressible, even when the Buddha talks about it. That's why the teachings of the Buddha are not proof for the existence of emptiness. They're only pointing us in that direction. That's why we need to do all the work. So if you look at, for instance, the wheel of dependent arising, there's an image of a Buddha pointing at the moon. It's actually pointing at the true cessation, but just pointing in that direction. You can take the same symbolism and saying when the Buddha talked of emptiness, he was just pointing in that direction, pointing at something, and we need to figure out what that is. We shouldn't get caught up in the finger, in those words, really. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is, therefore, the words of the Buddha are not expressing really emptiness. That's just the first step, learning the words, reflecting on them, and then meditating on them until we come to our an understanding or realization ourselves And once that's directly realized, well, that is the actual emptiness once you realize, and that's the inexpressible mother, which does not exist in anything inherently, but appears in all phenomena. Not to my mind, but it's there. It doesn't appear to my mind, but it appears to definitely a mind of a Buddha, to a correct mind. So it's there in all phenomena, just not appearing to my mistaken mind. Why does it not appear to me? Because to me, the opposite appears. So to my mind, the table appears to exist inherently, which is why its lack of inherent existence cannot appear to my mind. If I didn't have that appearance, of course it would appear. So therefore, this inexpressible mother of mind, not existing in any form, appears in all forms. So phenomena lack inherent existence. They do not exist in them inherently. So emptiness does not inherently exist in them, but still appears, still exists in them. So in this mutual dependence of emptiness and form alone is an important lesson indeed. Now I need to go look at my, yeah, does not exist in any, she appears in all the forms of conventional appearances. So there you have this mutual dependence of emptiness and dependent arising. Very important, this mutual dependence of emptiness and dependent arising, which is unique to the Prasangika. As I said, it's also expressed by the Heart Sutra, form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. That emptiness and dependent arising are inseparable, inseparably linked. They're not identical, but they're of one nature, which is another way of saying they're inseparably linked. Furthermore, in order to completely realize emptiness, you need to understand dependent arising on a sattva's level. Now, not everyone is saying that, but you may have heard Sonne speak about it, and maybe some other teachers. Just the non-findability of the way the I appears to me, that is not sufficient to realize emptiness. And some of my teachers argue that, well, first of all, when you do the analysis of the 7 extremes, so the 7 views or the 7 extremes as they usually describe when you take a chariot, and the 7 extremes as they're described by Chandrakirti, when you refute one after the other, in the end, after you refuted all of them, you still haven't realized emptiness yet, because those 7 are like the brother, right? Are like the brother. Once you understand that none of those 7 are possible, then you can realize emptiness. It's not simultaneous, that when you understand the chariot is not one with its part, it's not different than its part, it's not the collection and so forth. Once you understand that, you understand a certain type of non-findability, but that doesn't mean you realize emptiness right away. It still takes some time to then realize emptiness. Okay. So from that is already clear, just non-findability is not enough. But some of my teachers say that once you realize that non-findability that goes beyond just these 7 extremes, that is still not the realization of emptiness, because you need to arise from that and then understand that phenomena, although they don't exist inherently, they still exist in dependence, and realize this subtle level of dependent arising. Okay, and it'll come a little bit later when the text talks about exactly this. Lama Tsongkhapa says it. A lot of texts talk about this inseparability of understanding both, when there's no contradiction between the lack of inherent existence of something and at the same time its interdependence. So it doesn't mean you understand those simultaneously, but there's no contradiction. Anyway, I thought there's this beautiful explanation to come to this, or to understand what is really meant with this in Kunchujime Wangpo's text. So I thought to just read this, because I wouldn't know how to say this in any way better. So it's much better to read this. It says actually, as part of verse 7, no, as verse 6, part of verse 6, it says here, what is to be understood here is to be taken as the dawning of emptiness as dependent arising, and the dawning of dependent arising as emptiness. Now the dawning, luckily there's a word in English. In German, you can't even use the word dawning. It's like, oh, what does dawning mean? So I use the word appearing. It's the appearing. It's the only word that, and it really means appearing. Literally, the sun appears, the sun dawns, the sun arises. It has that meaning. So the arising of emptiness as dependent arising, and the dawning of dependent arising as emptiness, which really means you think of one and the other after we've thought of one of them. Let's take emptiness. When you arise from having thought about them, dependent arising still makes total sense. Or the other way around, when you think of dependent arising and you arise from that thought, you think of emptiness, totally makes sense. There's no contradiction. So here it says that this consciousness, realizing external and internal dependent arisings as without inherent existence, ascertains without relying on another awareness, arising from that, all presentations of cause and effect, definition and definiendum, agent and object, and so on, as feasible in the context of a mere nominal imputation. So understanding the lack of inherent existence of phenomena, and then without needing to reflect on anything further, you rise from that and understand everything makes sense. And then further, the other way around, that this awareness ascertaining and external and internal things as dependent arisings, that is, as dependent imputations, is able to induce a strong consciousness ascertaining the emptiness of inherent existence without needing to rely on another awareness, is the dawning of dependent arising as the meaning of emptiness. So beautifully explained, I believe. And this is also when Lama Tsongkhapa says in the 3 principal aspects of the path, and Sholmes quotes this a lot, when without alternation and simultaneously, I mean, not exactly simultaneous, but one after the other, from only seeing dependent arising as non-delusive, as in accordance with reality, and ascertaining consciousness entirely destroys the mode of apprehension of the object, that time is completion of analysis of the view. So you need to complete those two. If you do your meditation and one day there's no appearance, you understand that the way the I appears, the way it appears to us, and the conventional I doesn't appear on its own. So don't worry about annihilating something which exists. No, your I will always appear as inherently existent. So when that I, the way it appears to you, when you start analyzing, and through the different reasonings, 7 extremes, 2 extremes, 1 or different, if you analyze dependent arising, at some point, you come to the point there's no way in which you can find the I. There's just nothing that can be found from the side of the object. If then you arise from that and everything falls into place in terms of dependent arising, that agent, object, action, all that makes sense, then it's complete. This is what it says. That time is completion of analysis of the view. Okay, that would mean understanding emptiness. I want to go on a little bit longer. I know we have question and answers, but yeah, so to say a little bit more. There's also a great quote by the scholar adept Noor Sangetsu. You can read that when you've got time. Then there's also a quote by the 7th Dalai Lama, in a song. It's beautifully expressed, but no need to read it. All right, so based on that, I hope we get a good sense that those two, dependent arising and emptiness, need to be understood in union without any contradiction. And of course, when you think of dependent arising, that it's very easy to go back into the mind that understands they lack inherent existence. That's when it's complete, as Lama Tsongkhapa himself says. All right, and then verse number 7. Verse number 7, extremely important. I need to go back a little bit. Okay, now the father comes in. Previously, it was the brother, maybe an elder person who assists us, a brother, but who doesn't play the same role as the father. Okay, mother is emptiness, but here the father refers to, and this is my interpretation, I'm not sure, I didn't see it anywhere, but just from the different commentaries from what I read, the I mean, it's impossible to say dependent arising is empty. The brother is dependent arising in the same way as the father. Why would Changkya Rölpai Dorjé distinguish between the two, the brother and the father? He could have just said the father right from the beginning. And then also the way he uses, and I'm just stressing, this is my own interpretation, it needs to be analyzed, but the way he uses the brother as like using in the sense of expressing the brother again and again in connection with this reasoning. And as we know, reasoning means it's just a coarser version which points you in the right direction, but there's a subtler level of dependent arising, as I said earlier on. So here the father refers to either dependent arising in general or dependently arisen phenomena, dependently arisen appearances. So these are not the same, of course, one dependent arising itself and then the dependently arisen phenomena, but here it's kind of used interchangeably. Now here, initially, the father mainly refers to those dependently arising appearances. Okay, so take the self, that is the conventional I, that is a dependently arisen appearance. Now, are we searching for that? No, actually, this needs to be clear. We're not searching just for the conventional father, because the conventional father, you don't need to undergo analysis of that, like ultimate analysis, because it merely exists as imputed. But we're here taking on the basis of the I, the conventional I, the way it appears to me. So my conventional I, which does exist, it appears to be more than that. Every time it appears, so the conventional I does not appear on its own to my mind. It's impossible. It always appears as having more of an existence that it actually has. My mind always adds something to it, in other words, just from the point of view of appearance. And so now that extra, that inherent existence that appears to my mind as mixed with the conventional I, now that I'm going to look for, okay? It's based, of course, the basis is the conventional I. Without the conventional I, it wouldn't appear that way. So that's the basis. For any misapprehension, there's always a basis. If you apprehend, for instance, well, the classic example, the horns of a rabbit horns, well, they're actually the rabbit ears. That's the basis that does exist, and they appear to be horns. Or the other examples, I don't know, blue snow mountain. Well, there's a white snow mountain that appears to be blue. Those are usually the example giving in the texts, or I don't know, an optical illusion that appears to be, there's a circle that seems to be actually circling around while in reality it's just a still circle. Well, the circle, the actual existing circle, that is the basis. And based on that, it appears in a certain way. So for every optical illusion, there's always a basis. The same is true for this greatest of optical illusions or root illusions or root misapprehensions, which is the way we apprehend phenomena such as the I. And so the basis is the conventional I, as I said, and when I start looking for this I, the way it appears to me, what do I find? That's based on the father, the dependently arisen appearances. Based on that, when I search for this father, well, not the father really, but the way it appeared, the way the father appears to me, the way, in this case, the I appears to me, what do I find? My mother. Okay, my father, this inherently existent I, is found in my mother's lap, is found in the sphere of emptiness. That's how these kind parents save their child. So understanding this in combination, it's again, as we've already heard previously, it's the combination of emptiness and dependent arising. I have to bring those together until there's no longer any contradiction. So if I understand phenomena, yes, they appear. But if I look for this essential existence that they seem to have, all I find is emptiness. Thus, they do appear to me. That's one aspect, but they exist they exist as lacking inherent existence. So when I understand that in combination, then everything is possible, the I is possible, everything is possible, because it lacks inherent existence, and therefore it can harm, it can benefit, it can do this and it can do that on a conventional level, then I'm saved. That's how my kind parents, and here when I say kind parents, here it becomes obvious, whereas previously the father seemed to refer to the basis of emptiness, the basis of emptiness, so the table, the I, and so forth. So to realize this basis of emptiness, which is basis of the table, the lack of inherent existence of the table. What is its basis? The table. The lack of inherent existence of the I. What is its basis? The conventional I. So here on that basis, when I start looking for that which appears to me, I come to realize emptiness, the sphere of emptiness, or I find my father. I find my father as in my mother's lap. That's the sentence here, which indicates I can put the two together. The father makes sense and the mother makes sense. That's how these kind parents, and in this context, dependent arising and emptiness, save their child. That's really what he's saying. Okay, there's another verse that is to follow, but we can do this next week. I'm sorry for racing through it. I hope you could still hear me clearly. I sometimes get carried away and I talk too quickly. But those are the most important verses, and we haven't had that much time to reflect more on emptiness. Hopefully there'll be more time for that. But I think the main message of these verses is, first of all, that everything is an expression of emptiness. Phenomena are only possible because they lack inherent existence. And when I say to bring emptiness into our daily life, of course, to just repeat the words, I who don't exist inherently, go to the bathroom who don't exist inherently. Okay, that's great. But if we can also think along these lines to bring this into this way of, well, looking into things, at least as often as we can, so that phenomena only exist because they don't appear inherently, because they're merely labeled in that way. So that's the first step. But then also understand those two combined together. Well, first, before saying how combined together, well, also the fact that if they did exist inherently, nothing would be possible. To also consider that, and then bring in dependent arising and emptiness together, the way described in verse 7. All right, and of course, there are many other aspects of emptiness described in other texts. There are to be considered the reasoning of the chariot and so forth, the sevenfold reasoning as described in Chandrakirti's text, Nagarjuna's fivefold reasoning as described in the verse about the Tathagata, the Buddha, I mentioned it last time, and so forth. All right, now we got some time for questions. Any questions? Andrew, do you raise your hand?
I did raise my hand, if I could ask
Yes.
a question. I'm unclear about the distinction that got made with the brother being dependent arising, and then it seemed like the father was dependent arising. And is there significance in that?
Well, I guess I said in the beginning, the brother, in a sense, is just a coarser level of dependent arising,
Okay.
right? It's just that the level of dependent arising that helps us to understand emptiness. Now,
Right.
the coarser level of dependent arising, it's only that which we can use as a reasoning in order to then understand emptiness, because that which is the reasoning to establish something else, in this case, emptiness, needs to be easier understood. It needs to be something that is a sign of, so a sign that points us in the right direction, but that is easier understood than emptiness itself. So it can only be this coarser level of dependent arising, not the subtlest level. Because as I said, the subtlest level of dependent arising can only be understood once you realized emptiness. Once you realize emptiness, then you can realize how phenomena exist on the subtlest level. But if I use that subtlest level of dependent arising as the reason, I will not realize emptiness. The reason is too difficult to understand, therefore it wouldn't indicate emptiness. Another example is, you've probably heard this reasoning given for subtle impermanence. Phenomena are impermanent, because they were created by causes and conditions. Being created by causes and conditions is coarser, and therefore it's easier to understand that than understanding impermanence, the fact that they change moment by moment. But it's dependence on the fact that they were created by a cause. And in order to be created, they have to, well, they were created by a cause, and therefore they also give rise to a result. And in that process, they have to transform to be able to give rise to a result. Based on that, we can then come to understand, oh, they have to change, and they change all the time. So here's something coarser is taken to understand something subtler. Now, why do you use the brother? Okay, it's just the analogy here. Well, a father is really important in our life. I mean, a father gives birth to us, just as the mother, we need both. So that analogy of the mother of the Buddha, the father of the Buddha, dependent arising, yeah, well, you can stretch it here and say we need both. We need this in order to really become liberated and enlightened. We need the subtlest level of dependent arising and emptiness both. But to get to the emptiness, we also need the brother, right? Not as important. And if brother refers to just an older person, an older man, older than us, could be any teacher who teaches us and so forth, in that way could be seen as a brother. But even just our sibling, our brother, it's just someone who shows us certain things, can help us point in the right direction, but not like a father and a mother. Does that make sense, Andrew?
Totally makes sense, Geshe-la. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Sneh, please.
Hi, Geshe-la. I would like your advice on, the meditations on emptiness. So when we speak about, like, for example, doing the same and difference analysis, and you come to a conclusion, and then, you're supposed to rest with sort of the generic image of emptiness appearing to your mind. And I always think, I don't know how to do that because, you're coming to an absence or you're coming to a negation. And I don't know what that means, and especially a non-implicative negation. So I can do the analysis, and yes, it makes sense, but then there's like nothing.
Okay. Well, first of all, you don't focus on the generic image, you focus on the non-findability. Okay. Now, of course, that's a non-implicative negation. Sometimes we have a sense, well, negations, some people even say they don't exist, but of course they do exist. I mean, there was what is it called from cancer? Recession from cancer. No, that's not the right word. When people no longer have cancer, there's a word for it. I forget now. Anyway, so that certainly exists, right? And we can definitely talk about the absence of monkey in my room. So these definitely exist. Now, the question is, can we perceive them? Yes, we can. Actually, we can, but it's difficult in the beginning. Now, when you say you meditate on emptiness, so you search for the I, the way it appears to you, and the way you just described, not one with the aggregates, no, and so forth. So it could be those two. You could add a few other possibility for the way in which that inherent I could exist, but you don't find it. You look here, you look there, and you come to the conclusion, it's not there, not there. And you just focus on not there. Right? It's the mind is just focusing on not there, not on the words. I mean, I have to use words now to talk about it, of course, but it's almost like you look around in your room, you're looking for something, like you lost your pen, and you come to the conclusion, not there. I mean, without using words, it's just your mind concludes, not there, right? We can do that. Because that's the reason you go out of your room and you go and search somewhere else, unless you'd come to that conclusion. It's similar here, except you don't look for the I in this room, you look for the I within the aggregates. One different collection and so forth. And at some point, it's just not there. Okay, I mean, using words here in this case, but just that non-findability, and you focus on that. That's it, right? Focus on that. And then in order to get used to this this inseparability from dependent arising and emptiness, you remain with this for some time, allow for it with single point of concentration. So you use analysis and then single point of concentration for this conclusion you've come to sink deeper, if you like. And at some point, when you rise from it, try to reflect on how the I nonetheless exists in dependence on causes and conditions and so forth, so that there's a sense, again, it does exist. And then you go back again and you alternate between the two to bring the two closer together. But I hope the first step is clear. Just that. Not there. Okay. All right. More questions? No more? I'll just continue. If we don't have more questions, that's fine. I'll just continue with the text.
Looks like there's a couple more questions from Amy and then Peter.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see them. Okay.
Geshe-la.
Yes.
So it has to be the two together, because if we only focus on the first part, then it seems to me that that's where there's the danger of falling into nihilism, of feeling there's nothing. Okay. So we have to alternate. We have to go back to the dependence in order not to fall into that extreme.
Right. Yes. Yes, totally. I mean, I think you can kind of check your own mind. I mean, if you analyze and you come to this conclusion the way I described it earlier, in the same way, I can't find the pen in my room, it's not in my room. In a similar way, when you look at the I, it's not this, it's not that, and so forth, until you're determined, you're definite about it's not there. I mean, what you've actually negated right now is not the conventional I, but the I the way it appears to you. So that means automatically it's the inherent I. So you've only negated the inherent I. But then when you arise from that and you think, I don't exist, well, obviously that mind that has come to the conclusion the inherent I is not there has taken to an extreme. And the way you describe it, that's why you need to alternate it in order to not fall into the extreme of nihilism. But the thing is, here with regard to the I, and we'll come to that a little later, there's a danger in the Gelug tradition. That's what Changkya Rölpai Dorjé also says. There's danger in the different traditions as we know them. In some tradition, there's more danger of falling into the extreme of nihilism, or nihilism, as you say, depending on the person. In the Gelug tradition, there's more emphasis on phenomena exist conventionally in order not to fall into the extreme of nihilism. But the problem with that is that we sometimes feel, okay, so the I exists, the conventional I exists, and then there's this inherent I over there. We're not aware that what we're really searching for is the I the way it appears to us. That's really important. So we don't need to worry. The I that appears to us is always the inherently existent I. And then when we don't find it, it's always the I that seems to exist above and beyond labeling. So there's something just more than being labeled. It's not that I just say I when my head hurts, that this is labeled. There's something more. Or it's not like when my legs walk, I say the I walks, I label on the basis of that. It seems there's another I, there's something more that's being picked up and that's also walking. That's the extra, that is which is extra. And what we analyze is really, we allow the mind, first for this I to appear to the mind. And then once it's there, we search for it. Then when there's this non-findability, if you do it in that way, this really what you look at, the conclusion you come to is really that I can't be found. But then if you arise from the meditation with another mind, you then say, well, you then think, oh, the I it's not there at all. I don't exist. It doesn't matter what I do. That's a case of falling into the extreme of nihilism. So to avoid that, as you said, you need to reflect on emptiness. You need to reflect on dependent arising. And just check, does it make sense? Does it make sense that this I cannot be found, but nonetheless it exists? And when it does, you're on the right way. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. I'll look at the chat now.
Amy, did you have a question? You're muted. You're muted.
Following on that, in sitting with the I not existing, if fear arises, then what do you do? Do you immediately go to dependent arising, and what level of dependent arising, or how do you work it?
Okay, well, actually, fear is of course a good sign. It shows that you're doing it correctly, as in like, wow, the I's not there. So fear is a natural reaction, but of course, fear can mean different things. So it should not be a debilitating kind of fear. Instead, well, watch the fear so that it doesn't become overwhelming. And then, of course, go to dependent arising, because the fear is really of disappearing. I disappear. But then if you remind yourself, well, the I, what is the I? It exists. It's labeled on the basis of mind and body. Of course, if we really take it to the extreme, we should also analyze mind and body don't exist inherently, not end up getting rid of the inherent I, but then still holding on to an inherent mind and body. But anyway, since we just described that first step, as I just said, so when fear arises, become aware of the fear. Anyway, once the fear is there, you're no longer focusing on the lack of inherent existence of the way the I appears, of that inherently existent I. That's gone. So look at the fear, acknowledge it, don't push it away. I'll just have the opposite effect. Acknowledge it, and then gently take the mind to, yes, dependent arising. Where's the fear come from? From the sense I'm disappearing, I'm not there. Well, to remind ourselves, well, I'm not disappearing, I'm not non-existent, because conventionally, as a dependently arisen phenomena, I do exist. Okay, and so once the fear is gone, then you can go back. Does that make sense, Amy?
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, next person. Sneh, or is there anyone else who hasn't had the chance to ask a question? No. All right, please go ahead, Sneh.
Geshe-ma, just a quick thing about, the form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is none other than emptiness. I always wondered, why do we have the second two, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form? Like, why form is emptiness and is not sufficient, just the first two?
Okay. Well, the first one, of course, I'm just saying why all of them are important, and then hopefully the question will be answered through that. So first, we're just saying phenomena lack inherent existence. Okay, so this describes the first truth, the truth of the ultimate truth. Phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Then, with regard to the second sentence, or the second phrase, is saying that, well, form nonetheless exists, but it only exists because it lacks inherent existence. So emptiness as form is really saying emptiness makes it possible for form to exist. So form does exist, but only because it lacks inherent existence. So here, previously it just tells us how it doesn't exist. The second sentence tells us on the basis of how it does not exist, that it still exists conventionally. And then the third and the fourth sentence, or third and fourth sentence, they're important because now they bring the two together, the true truth. The fact that the true truth are not identical, but they exist inseparably. This is a very difficult relationship that not only the true truth share, a lot of phenomena have this relationship in that their existence depends on each other in a very specific way, and still they're not identical. To give you an example of something which doesn't have that relationship, so a pillar over here and a vase over there. Of course, they can interact with each other and a kind of dependence can be established. But in general, the existence of the vase is not dependent on the pillar, and the existence of the pillar is not dependent on the vase. So those two are neither identical, obviously, but they also are not inseparably linked in that, in English it's said, it's called they're of one nature. They are of one nature, or they are one nature. It's not a phrase that's usually used in English. It's a very Buddhist phrase. But anyway, what this is saying is that two things are inseparably linked in that the existence of one is dependent on the other, which is not the case with the vase and the pillar. Now, to give you another example, my body and my right arm, they are also inseparable. They're, first of all, not identical. My arm is not my body is not my arm, but they're one nature. They're inseparably linked in that if my body didn't exist, my arm wouldn't exist. And the other way around, if my arm didn't exist, my body right now would also not exist, at least not. I'd have a one-arm body, but not a two-arm body. So therefore, the existence of one is inseparably linked to the existence of the other. So that they are, first of all, existing at the same time. That's also important. They exist at the same time. And the existence of one is linked to the existence of the other. Now, when we study philosophy, we learn about a lot of examples where two things are of one nature and they're not of one nature. Okay, lots of examples are given to understand the concept. Now, how is this important in the concept of the true truth? Of course, we are saying with the last two lines, or the sentence as well, form is empty, emptiness form. Emptiness, form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form. Without getting too caught up in the words themselves, the meaning of these words is those two truths are of one nature, but they're still different. So they're not identical. So in other words, these two lines, they're telling us that although they're not identical, nonetheless, they're intrinsically linked by way of being one nature. Why do we need to know that? Why do we need to know that? Are we saying the true truth in general are one nature? No, that's not the meaning of that. Doesn't mean that. No, the conventional truth is not one nature with ultimate truth. That's not the meaning of it. Taking a particular conventional truth, such as a table. Here in the Heart Sutra it mentions form, but let's take the table. The table lacks inherent existence. So the table is empty. Emptiness is the table. The table exists conventionally, but it only exists because it lacks inherent existence. And then it tells us something about the relationship between the table and its emptiness. The table is a conventional truth. Its emptiness is an ultimate truth. Those two are of one nature. And that needs to be understood. That needs to be understood to fully realize emptiness. To understand that the lack of inherent existence of the table is inseparably linked to the table. It's not the same. The table is a conventional truth. Its emptiness is an ultimate truth. So they cannot be identical. To perceive them as identical, that would be wrong. But at the same time, they're not separate. They're inseparably linked. Now, in order, what we talked about before, in order to understand the inseparability of dependent arising and emptiness, we need to understand exactly that. So again, this inseparability of dependent arising and emptiness means that in terms of each and every emptiness and its basis, each and every, so the table, it lacks inherent existence, but it's a dependently arisen phenomenon. Therefore, those two are inseparably linked. And then applying it to whatever exists, the I, even to emptiness itself, taking emptiness itself. Yes, it appears, it exists. It's not one with its own emptiness, but it can also not be separated from its own emptiness. So in that way, therefore, the first two lines just describe the true truth separately. The first line describes the profundity of the ultimate. Form is empty, or the table is empty. The second line, emptiness is form, describes the profundity of the conventional. And then the next two lines describe the relationship between the true truth, that is dependent arising and emptiness, but in the sense of one being the basis for its emptiness and those two being inseparably linked. They're not identical, but inseparably linked. That's what these two phrases indicate. Is that clear enough?
That was so helpful, Geshe-ma.
Okay.
I'll have to listen to it over and over again, but
Think about it. Yes.
Yeah, it was so great to at least see how they fit together.
Yeah. So there's a book by His Holiness that explains the Heart Sutra. It's called The Heart of Essence, I believe. So if you read this, His Holiness actually explains exactly this phrase, which is, well, the essence of the Heart Sutra. So if you read this further, yeah, hopefully it'll make more sense. Great. Any last question? No? Okay. Then it's exactly 6 o'clock. So let's leave it today and we'll continue tomorrow. Please, like I said last time, if you can read ahead. I'll probably go through around 7-8 verses like today. And you'll be better prepared if you read the commentaries. Definitely Shantideva Wangmo's commentary. All right, great. Then all that's left is, of course, to dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated today on this auspicious day, because His Holiness taught this morning and he'll continue to teach tomorrow. So it's wonderful that it coincides. This event, His Holiness's teachings on dependent arising. So let's dedicate having this great opportunity to receive His Holiness teachings and to also learn this very precious text. May whatever positive potential, whatever virtue we've accumulated, help us in the long term, of course, to realize the ultimate nature of ourselves, of all other phenomena, so that we're able to reduce our misapprehension in that way, all our other afflictive emotions, such as anger and so forth, and eventually completely remove them. And eventually, and finally, ultimately, reach the state of an enlightened Buddha. In that way, fully actualizing our potential as living beings, not for our own sake alone, but for the sake of all sentient beings. But in the meantime, may the positive potential we've accumulated also affect others around us in a positive way. For us being a good example, and the peace of mind that this may eventually create in our mind, may it also affect others, bringing them more peace of mind, reduce their anxiety, their pain, their fear, and so forth. While feeling this from the depth of our heart, let's dedicate with the actual prayers. Sheila, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay, starting over. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of Bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Due to the merits of the 3 times collected by me, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, and all other sentient beings, which are totally non-existent from their own side, may the I, which is also totally non-existent from its own side, achieve Guru Shakyamuni Buddha's enlightenment, which is also totally non-existent from its own side, and lead all sentient beings who are totally non-existent from their own side to that enlightenment, which is totally non-existent from its own side, by myself alone, who is also totally non-existent from its own side. For His Holiness, wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparable, kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank
And
you,
maybe
Geshe-la.
just for between today and tomorrow, maybe do as Lama Tsongkhapa, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche kind of indicates in his last dedication prayer, to remind yourself all through the night, through the rest of the day until tomorrow, again and again, go back to lack of inherent existence of the I. And if you can, bring it together with dependent arising as your homework, if you like. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you all. We'll continue tomorrow morning. I hope to see you all. Have a good evening. Good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Thank you, Shantideva.